and it's brighter. And it's not just brighter at my home, it's also, in a sense, it's just brighter everywhere. Because not only do people have lights out and outside, and Bass Pro has enough to see from the space station, but we also have programs like what we've seen today, and we get to watch our kids. And I don't know about you, but it just sort of brightens up the room when our kids are performing and when they're celebrating something that God has done. And it's just a time of year where there's a lot of reason for us to be grateful. Not everything is easy and not everything is good, but there's a lot of things to be grateful for. I know when my dad was here on this earth, I appreciated him immensely, and when he passed away, that was a really sad time. But I got to admit, even in the midst of the sadness, I was grateful. I was grateful that he got to be my dad. I was grateful that I got to spend the time that I had with him. If you'd have told me this is how many years you're going to get and no more, I would have taken it, because those years meant everything. So even in the midst of sadness during Christmas, there's still things to be grateful for. There's still some light in the midst of all the darkness many times. And sometimes, though, the darkness is pretty much all we see. I was trying to walk through a dark room in my house, because you have to in that room. There's no light switch when you go in. It's a living area, but there's no light on the ceiling. So the only light that's in it are the ones that you put in there, so lamps and things like that. And where the lamps are, you have to walk through the darkness until you can reach the lamp. And so that's what I was doing. I was walking through the darkness because I knew where the lamp was pretty much. I couldn't see it. I just knew where it was. And I would reach out and find the little cable and pull it. And the light would come on and the house would be great, or the living room would be great. And so I was walking through the darkness. Now, the thing is, human beings, especially me, I can't really see that well in the dark, but cats can. And nobody told my cat that I couldn't. And so she did what she normally does. She flopped on the floor in front of where I was walking and stretched way out, assuming that I wasn't going to step on her and kill her. And I almost killed her. I mean, right there, I didn't see her because she just assumed that I could. And there was something going on in the darkness that I didn't realize. I didn't realize that she was flopping right in front of me, and I almost killed her. Her name is Cashew, and if you're from Springfield, Missouri, you get it, Cashew Kitty. So, and that's her name. I apologized to her quite a bit, but she didn't really care. I'll tell you, though, the Christmas story is a little bit like that. The Christmas story, it's about Jesus. We sort of know about it, but many times we're not looking at the Christmas story. Many times there's so many other things in this world that have our attention. There's so many things in this world that grab our attention, and maybe sometimes when we stop and we talk about what Christmas really means, it reminds us that there's more going on in this world than we see. There's more going on in this world than what meets the eye, because God is at work and God is doing things. I mean, when you read the Christmas story, you kind of see that all of a sudden, in the middle of everything that was going on, God was at work, because all of a sudden you've got angels appearing to shepherds. You've got a star in the sky that Magi notice. You've got Joseph and Mary having dreams, or meeting an angel who's telling them, hey, God's doing this. That in the midst of all the political things that are going on in their world, and they had plenty, in all of the stuff, in the midst of that, God was doing something. In your bulletin, I said something on the title. I said that God's invading our world. I really would like to change that just slightly today. I would just like to say this: God is already here. God's already here. Now, I think sometimes in ancient times they sort of assumed that sort of thing. They assumed they didn't really divide things up into a natural world and a spiritual world. They didn't do that in ancient times. It was all one world, and the spiritual was going on at the same time, right in the midst of it. But for us, I think sometimes it's a little harder, because we do divide those things. We do divide those things. We have our world, And then there's the spiritual world. So we'll spend some time with the spiritual world occasionally on a Sunday, or maybe when we're reading our Bible at home. But all the rest of the time, we're just focused on the natural world. We separate those kinds of things. But in reality, God is already here. He's already in our world. We might not be looking for it, we might not see it, but He's already there. Even in ancient times, they had a tendency to focus on the things that were right in front of them. Bethlehem was a whopping 6 miles from Jerusalem, but only the Magi walked over to check it out. You'd have thought about it when they heard about the star, when all of Jerusalem gets up in an uproar about the Magi showing up. You would think that maybe somebody would have gone and checked it out, but only the Magi did. It was a whopping 6 miles away. Even us, we could have walked that in an afternoon. But there were a lot of politics going on. King Herod, the Romans, all those kinds of things. There was a lot of things happening in their world. A lot of things with their jobs and with their lives that were going on. And it's easy just to kind of focus in on the stuff that's in front of us. And sometimes not look for what God is also doing and how God is also at work. I mean, we can focus on the game, we can focus on the job, we can focus on the news, we can focus on our own things that are going on in our own life, our own dreams and hopes. But right here in this world, God is already here. And He's already at work. And the one thing you can take from the Christmas story, one of the things you can take is this. And one of the first things you'll notice is people like the Magi, the wise men from the east, they were looking. They were paying attention. Everybody else might be focused on what was right in front of them, but I tell you about those Magi, I don't know how many of them there were. We always say there were 3 because they brought 3 gifts, but who knows? There could have been 12 of them, and they brought 3 gifts. We don't know, but the Magi were paying attention. They were paying attention. They noticed that there was a star that suddenly was significant. You know, before I stepped on my cat, I knew that I owned a cat. I knew that. And I knew that she would flop in front of you sometimes, all the time. I guess that's what cats do. And I also knew, if you'd have asked me, I also knew that cats can see in the dark. I should have been more careful. And I should have been paying attention to that sort of thing. And there's some truth about that, because when it comes to the Christmas story, most of us would say we know that God is at work. We know that God is working in our life and He's working in the world. We already know that in our head, but it's one thing to know that. It's another thing to live it. It's another thing to really be paying attention to that. And the Magi were paying attention. There's a lot of characters in the Christmas story, by the way. There's King Herod, the shepherds, the Magi from the east. There's the priests and the scribes, Mary and Joseph, and then probably a whole bunch of normal people. And, you know, all of those people should have been paying attention. They all would have said that they understood that God was at work, that God was around them. They all would have said that. They all believed that, especially in ancient times. But it's one thing to know it, it's a different thing to live it. The Magi were living it. The Magi were paying attention. When they saw the star, everything stopped and they made the trip. And they came from probably a lot farther away. Maybe over there in Persia, over there in modern-day Iran, and they make the trip because they saw the star. In Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, 2, and 3, I want to read those verses with you if we could. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, 2, and 3, first book of the New Testament. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem. Verse 2, it says that they were saying, where is he who's been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him. And in verse 3 it says, when King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. They were all worked up. They were all worked up because the wise men from the east, they were politically powerful kind of people. And so when they traveled with all kinds of, really colorful, flowery robes and an entourage. And they were advisors to kings. They were the kinds of with politically powerful people that could name someone a king. And so when they came in and they said, "We've seen a star in the east," they practiced astrology, they interpreted dreams, and when they came in and they said, "We saw a star," everybody kind of got worked up. One of the reasons they got worked up is because Herod was a paranoid maniac. He's an absolute paranoid maniac. He right before he passed away, he was very sick. He had all the important people rounded up and taken to a particular place, and he gave orders that when he died, that all of them should be executed so that everyone would mourn when he died. Because if it was just Herod that died, he was afraid that everybody would celebrate, and he wanted everybody to cry, so he gave them a reason to cry, and he rounded up a bunch of important people, and he gave orders, "Kill them all when I die. Then at least people will be sad," I guess. But I tell you, they didn't do that. They disobeyed him. They let him go after he died. But that was good. But he was a paranoid maniac. And so all of a sudden, the Magi show up and they say there's a king that's been born. And now all of a sudden, what is that going to mean? There was political ramifications for all that. But the Magi were looking at what God was doing. And God's already at work in our life as well. And sometimes the people who should be paying attention to what God is doing don't. In Matthew chapter 2, verse 4, 5, and 6, it says, "So Herod assembled the chief priests and the scribes," the religious guys. "And he asked them where the Christ would be born. Where's the Messiah going to be born? This coming king that the Bible prophesied. Where's he going to be born?" Verse 5, they told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea," they told him, because this is what was written by the prophet. And they quote from the prophet Micah in the Old Testament. And they said, "And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." That's what the Bible said. The chief priests and the scribes, they knew what God was going to do. They knew the prophecies. They knew the Bible. And none of them went and checked it out. They would have had all the right answers. They should have known. Just like many of us. We would all have the right answers. God's at work. We believe in all that stuff. But they weren't going to take time out of their day. They weren't going to stop what they were doing. They weren't going to focus on what God was doing. They were going to stay focused on their immediate world. They weren't looking, even though of all the people they should have. But I believe that God is here in our world, and that we, at least now, of all people, should always be looking for Him. We should always be asking things like, "God, what are you telling me in this situation? God, what do you want me to do? Where are you leading me? What are you trying to show me?" When we're reading the Bible, we ought to be asking questions when we read the Bible. "God, why do you want me to see this? What is it about this particular chapter? What is it about this particular verse? What do you want me to know?" We ought to be asking things like that because He's already here. We should be looking for Him. And we should be looking around our world and saying, "God, what are you doing? How can I help?" The Magi were looking, and they kept looking, and they didn't stop. So after they talked to Herod, and after they found out it was going to be Bethlehem, they went outside, and one of the first things they did when they went outside was they looked up again. And when they looked up, that star showed up. Because right there, when they were looking for God, here's what God did. God not only spoke to them first, God not only showed them something at one time, but they kept looking. And when they kept looking, God reaffirmed His leading. He reaffirmed it. And He does the same thing for you and me. Ever had God just reaffirm or show you something to sort of confirm something that you were pretty sure that God was trying to get your attention about? You were pretty sure that He was trying to lead you, and then all of a sudden there's just some little circumstance, some little thing happens. Maybe somebody says the right thing. Maybe you just happen to see a verse on a billboard as you drive by on the road, and there's just something, and God says, "I really am talking to you. This really is true." In Acts chapter 17, verse 27, you know how Paul described God to people that didn't know anything about Him? Paul said this, "He's not far from each one of us. He's already here," he said. "He's not far from each one of us." Then he says in the next breath, he says, "For in Him we live and move and have our being." And if God's already here, then you better believe that He can reach out to you. You can better believe that He can confirm what you were pretty sure that He was saying. So they never quit looking, and God reaffirmed that. And when you believe that God can do that sort of thing, when you believe that God can lead you, when you believe that God can speak through someone else to you, when God can speak into your heart, when God can open a door for your life, or maybe close a door for your life and say, no, don't go that way. When you believe God is able to do those things, then you look all the time. You look all the time. Because it sure helps when God shows you what to do. It sure helps when God says, this way. Oh, that's nice. You start looking all the time. At First Christian Church in Cassville, Missouri, we needed a keyboard player. I don't know when in the world we were talking about it, but we were talking about how we needed a keyboard player because we didn't have a keyboard player for our worship team, and we really needed one. We had a piano player, and on a Sunday when she couldn't be there, we had nothing, So we had Cheryl if she wasn't doing anything, and we had another piano player. And that was it. We didn't have a keyboard player, and so we prayed. And I kid you not, a lady walks in the church. I'm in the office. I could see her walk in the church. She walks in the church and she says, does anybody here need a keyboard player? She really did. It was the craziest thing I ever saw. I've been in ministry for 30 years. I've never had anybody, except for her, walk in and say, hey, you need a keyboard player? And we had just been praying about that. I don't think that was an accident, because I think God's already here. And they walked outside, and all of a sudden, God showed them again, and they knew it was from God. Verse 9, 10, and 11, it says, after hearing the king, the wise men went on their way, and there it was, the star they had seen at its rising. It led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. Verse 11, it says, entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. Falling to their knees, they worshipped him, and then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Ancient people quite often thought of stars as heavenly beings. They didn't realize how far away they were. They didn't know anything about them. They didn't have telescopes, that sort of thing, for many centuries. Ancient people really often thought of stars as angelic or heavenly beings. And it seems like that this star, when it first appeared, maybe it looked like a normal star, but there was something significant about it because nobody else had seemed to notice it. But here, when it appears again, it moves and it stands over a house, so you sort of get the impression this is not a normal star. I think it might have been an angel that was just shining bright in the heavens. For them, it was a star, but they would have thought a star was a heavenly being anyway. And this star comes down, and this star moves over a house, and they know which house it is. And the Bible says that they were excited, but in doing that, God reaffirmed to them right here. They had to go to Jerusalem to figure out where in the world to go. They didn't know, but when they walk out, all of a sudden the star reappears, and God shows them again. He shows them, and He shows them specifically, and they rejoiced. And they did that because God had worked right in front of them. He's already here. He can do those sorts of things if we just keep looking, if we keep asking, if we keep looking to Him for help every single day, every moment. And you can see God at work in the whole story. They give Mary and Joseph, who weren't very, very rich at all, didn't have a lot, give them gold and frankincense and myrrh. And those types of things were, among whatever else you want to say about them, they were valuable. And Mary and Joseph would need it because they were going to have to go to Egypt. They were going to have to run to Egypt to escape because Herod was going to try to kill the child. And they were going to have to run to Egypt to escape. And when you move, it costs money. And when you try to set up a place where you can live, it costs money. But God gave them the money right there, right before they needed to go. It's every now and then when something happens, and you come into a little bit extra, maybe you get a little, $50 you didn't expect, or maybe I don't know about you, but every time it seems like God just gives me money out of nowhere, it's because I got a bill that I don't know about, that I got to pay for soon. But I tell you, I'm grateful for that sort of thing. I'm grateful that He looks out for us sometimes, puts us in contact with the right people, gets us just enough help that we need. The Magi were looking, God reaffirmed, and God making all these things work out. And that's the last thing I want to share with you. When you look at this story, you realize that God is already here because God was working in their lives like that. He was directing everything. The Magi did astrology, and God gave them a sign. He gave them a star that they would notice. It was significant. The Israelites, they wrote down God's words. They had prophets. They collected these things as what became Scripture. Well, God gave them a prophecy. He says it's going to be in Bethlehem. The chief priests and the scribes, they had it. They knew. God spoke to them in a way that they would recognize. They just didn't respond. The Magi, they followed the stars. That's the sort of thing they looked at. God gave them a sign that they would recognize. They did respond. You know, sometimes, every now and then, you'll get a text from our church, and there's a reason why we send out a text, because we really want you to see that message. And everybody seems to look at a text. But you send out an email, they might look at it in 2 or 3 days. So if you really want somebody to see it, you send out a text. And so every now and then when we've got a message we've got to get this to the congregation and it's really important, so we'll send out a text because almost everybody will at least look at their phone. And I think what you see here, and I see God do this in my life, and I bet He does it in yours, is He'll speak to you in a way that you'll hear it, in a way that you'll see it, in a way that you'll recognize it. And maybe you feel like you're close with God when you read the Bible and God just makes verses jump out at you every now and then. Or maybe you really have noticed when God speaks to you through a friend. Or maybe you've got a particular preacher that you watch online that you really get a lot out of his messages and you feel like that God's speaking to you through that person. I think that God will speak to you in any way that you'll be watching, in any way that you'll be looking, in any way that we'll be listening. The question is, will we respond? Because even here, you see there's two choices. The chief priests and the scribes had the Scripture, and the Scripture said He's going to be born in Bethlehem, and they didn't respond. The Magi, they're looking at the stars, they're following their trajectories, and all of a sudden God gives them a sign in the sky, and they responded. I don't know how God is speaking to you this morning, or how He may speak to you this week, but I just want to encourage you to respond to Him, because He is already here in our world. He's already here. And we need to live like people that are always looking, that are always listening, and always ready to respond as God leads us in the midst of this dark world.